Thank you very much, those of you who gave me little baubles and cards and things for last month's Past Appreciation Month. I almost feel like I haven't been here long enough to be appreciated, really, but I feel pretty good about it. But I got cards and I got invitations and I've got little things that I just thought were wonderful. And so from Joy and I, we just say thank you very much. And later, Joy will have a little announcement too. You have later, right? All right. Well, okay. So I heard a story. I always hear a story, don't I? There's a retired pastor in Arizona. He calls his grown son in New York. He says, "Boy, I hate to ruin your day, but I have to tell you that your mom and I are getting a divorce. 45 years of misery is enough for the both of us." "Pop, what are you talking about?" says the shocked son. Dad says, "Well, we can't stand the sight of each other any longer. We're sick of each other. And frankly, I'm sick of talking about this. So would you just please call your sister in Chicago and tell her?" Well, so frantic, the son calls his sister, who herself then explodes on the phone saying, "No way they're getting a divorce. Just leave it to me. I'll take care of this." So she calls Phoenix immediately. She screams at her father, "You are not getting divorced. Don't do a single thing until I get there. I'm calling my brother back. We'll both be there tomorrow. Until then, don't do a thing. Do you hear me?" And he hangs up. The old pastor hangs up the phone, turns to his wife and says, "Okay, they're coming for Thanksgiving and they're paying their own way." Let me give this disclaimer. This is a joke of fiction. Any similarities to persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. I heard somebody criticizing or critiquing a sermon the other day, and they didn't like the fact that something negative like the pastor lying to somebody was first on the menu. But I don't endorse pastors lying to manipulate their kids to come for Thanksgiving holiday, at least not yet. And don't tell me it's too early for Thanksgiving jokes, as it's just 11 days away. Which means in 12 days we put up the Christmas decor. So this is sort of like the 12 days of Christmas. Sermon title today is Our Daily Bread. And bread in its many forms is something that is usually on the menu in most people's Thanksgiving celebration, right? At least it is, always has been for me. We serve dinner rolls or cornbread, dressing or stuffing, which is made of cornbread and rolls or bread. Afterwards, probably they're going to be pumpkin or banana bread, and sometimes even people make bread pudding, which is pretty easy to make. I saw a Breads from Around the World piece online that named such things as the French baguette, the Italian ciabatta, the Indian naan bread. Guess what America's known for? Quick bread. We can't get bread fast enough. Forget all that yeast rising nonsense. We just put baking powder into it and ta-da, biscuits, pancakes, cornbread, banana bread, etc. Welcome to America. It's not fast food. We don't have time for it. Now, last Sunday, Lynn's Sunday school class discussed the Lord's Prayer a bit. And then Wednesday night, I was touching on the same subject, and it occurred to me just how important bread is in the Bible and how important a role it plays in society. Remember in the prayer, it asked God in Matthew 6, beseeching our Father to give us this day our daily bread. At least it says that in almost every translation of the Bible, but in a few, like the New Living Translation, it turns the word bread into food in general, since it is certain that we need to eat more than bread, and bread has become a synonym for food in most cultures. What do we do when we eat together? We break bread. In fact, our society has quite a few bready phrases because of its importance to us, and in fact, to most societies. So we ask God for our daily bread, but how do we get it? Well, every house generally has at least one breadwinner who might even work at a bakery making bread so that he can earn some bread, to buy some bread, to take it home and break bread with his family while they listen to the music of bread. Speaking of breadwinner, Gary Ketchum won the chili cook-off yesterday, and he won some bread or dough, and he donated it back to the church. Congrats. Our chili man. But what about when we break bread with our companions? The word companion is a Latin word meaning with bread. In Spanish, pan is bread. There's a restaurant named what? Panera. It means bread basket. Where does the bread go that you eat? Into your bread basket, apparently, because that's what we call it when someone punches you in the stomach. They hit you right in the old bread basket. Of course, if you're lazy, you don't move around much, people might call you a loaf, because you loaf around like a loaf of bread that does nothing but just sit there. But you remember Jesus' miracle on the Mount was when he multiplied the loaves and fishes. Loaves of what? Bread, of course. And if you make a lot of bread and you do well in life, you might be considered upper crust in society, although there's some debate on the origin of that phrase. Nevertheless, no matter how much a rich person thinks they're the best thing since sliced bread, if they don't pay their bills, they're going to be toast. Now, our Christian faith embraces a lot of bread allusions because our Bible does. And that's why the most popular Christian daily devotional is called Our Daily Bread, like the sermon title. And don't confuse the Our Daily Bread devotional with Daily Word, the devotional booklet published by the non-Christian Unity Cult. Know the difference. I know that I just recently found out the Fundamentalist Baptists also put one out called the Baptist Bread. Now, Jesus calls himself the what of life in John 6, the bread of life. And in 1 Corinthians 10:16, St. Paul writes this. He says, "Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks a participation in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread that we break a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf, we who are many are one body, for we all share the one loaf." Perhaps that's the verse to read at the Thanksgiving table this year. I notice the relationship between the one loaf of bread and the one loaf that is the church, although I hope we aren't loafing around, and that's why people aren't getting back to church. But let's always be an encouragement to those folks out there and try to invite them in. And as common as bread is, we often turn it into something special or unusual for religious observances. Hot cross buns come out around Easter. People make altar bread, of course, for the communion wafer, symbolizing Passover unleavened bread. The reason behind today's message is that bread serves as just one example of many biblical things that run contrary to worldly wisdom. And we have to think about this and decide what to believe and why to believe it. The Bible says one thing, the world says another. How do we mesh the two, or can they be? It's not the everyday person who isn't aware of nutrition or never reads labels or doesn't concern themselves with health that's going to catch what I'm about to say, probably. But it's the person who's tried a diet. Anybody here try a diet before? You tried a diet, or you're told by your doctor to go on one. Or you just taken an interest in being healthy, and so you run into a pretty disheartening opinion from some of these folks on YouTube and in the news and in various magazines that say bread is trash. Bread is trash. And most people do not have celiac disease, but it's all the rage currently to speak negatively about gluten in bread, which is just a protein that gives a nice texture to the bread. And it's not just this. Do you recall as a kid taking flour and mixing it with water and turning it into paper mache? That white flour and water became paste. And if that's the case, what does it look like going through our bodies? Colon problems much? You see, most of the flour used to make commercial foods is white flour. And wheat is not generally white, if you've noticed. It's made white by stripping it of nutrients and fiber and then bleaching it and turning it into a white powder that has to be artificially enriched to give it any nutritional value at all. In fact, we've gotten in the habit of eating this junk bread so much, it just becomes sort of a paper plate to hold the other ingredients that you just consume. What's made out of white flour? Most pasta, most bread, virtually all donuts and pastries, pizza crust, cookies, most desserts, most breakfast foods like pancakes and French toast, and the list is endless. I was looking at the menu of a local pasta restaurant, and I was thinking how out of balance most of their dishes are on this menu. Everything is served with half a loaf of garlic bread. One day of the week, you can get a half-gallon bucket of spaghetti with the half a loaf of garlic bread. So it's essentially bread and more bread, just in different shapes, and nowhere does the menu say these are healthy, whole grain versions of these foods. So if they're like most restaurants, they're always going to be the white flour version. When I was younger, I had roommates. One took a loaf of bread from me, and he said, I'll replace it. I said, all right. His replacement was something called health nut bread. Now, I don't know if this still exists, but it was not health nut bread. And if you read the ingredients, you would know that. But of course, he didn't do that. He just read health nut bread. And I thought, how do they get away with that kind of thing? And I thought maybe they meant a nutty, not healthy person's bread. And often people buy a loaf of brown colored bread that says wheat bread on it, but that only gives the impression there's any fiber in the bread, as they barely add any whole wheat to the mix. Instead, they put caramel coloring to give the illusion of healthy bread. But virtually all the bread you buy is wheat bread. It's just stripped wheat, aka white flour. Problem with all this is that it is unhealthy and it's making people ill. Too much sugar is bad for us, and all the carbohydrate foods you consume break down ultimately into sugars, with the white carbs like white bread or rice being the worst culprits of raising blood sugar, causing diabetes, weight gain, and of course, without fiber, constipation. They say that most people dig their graves with their forks, and pastas, pancakes, and pastries are part of that equation, unfortunately. That's why when somebody was mentioning all the various breakfasts and free meals and things the social organizations give around here, I just think that that's what they're going to be making because it's cheap and they just feed a bunch of people stuff. So I personally limit the consumption of these because sometimes that's all there is. You put up with the inconvenience, but by and large, I try to eat whole foods, whole grains, real foods, and not laboratory-created things found nowhere in nature. But here's the deal. Some diets even suggest that all grain bread is bad, whether it's whole food or the stripped junk food that I'm talking about. Before coming here, Joy and I had tried a few different diets, just for fun. We tried something called the carnivore diet. That was the last one. It's an animal protein diet, includes no vegetables. You just get up in the morning and you stuff your face with meat and eggs and cheese. Do it again sometime around dinner. It was sufficient. We lost some weight. My fingers actually cleared up. But it just doesn't seem sustainable. Because after we had tried the keto diet, which included veggies, which I don't know if you've ever seen the keto diet, they just minimize the grains and fruits. I actually think that diet's sort of common sense diet. As the protein's high, the carbs are low, and a lot of fit people swear by that one. But the carnivore diet proponents were constantly referencing our human evolution and how we evolved and how we hit our peak when we were just eating meat. Our brains got bigger, we got stronger. And then since we started eating vegetables and slowing down and farming and all that, well, that messed us up. And then, of course, there's the other side. There are those who may or may not be religious, but they say you should never kill animals to eat them. But we should live like Adam and Eve and consume only vegetables and live in harmony with our fellow creatures of earth. Let me point out that every one of you is on a diet. you're on a diet. Most will die from what they ate. I just recently heard someone say the other day, they said they were on the seafood diet. Meaning they see food and they eat it. Another told me they were on a light diet. As soon as it gets light, they start eating. You remember Orson Welles? Orson Welles said, "My doctor told me to stop having intimate dinners for 4, unless there are 3 other people." But anything you eat constitutes your diet. Usually by diet, we mean something limited. Well, we should limit some things. And we know this, which is why we don't let our kids decide to eat only candy. Halloween just passed. My dad had a rule when I was a kid. You've got 3 days to eat that. Then he'd take it away. I never had a cavity in my entire life. That might be something to say. Unfortunately, we don't tell our adult selves the same thing. But the reason I bring the subject up is because I want to point to the Bible and ask, does the Bible say anything about what we should eat? It does. And while it might be helpful to look at the dietary laws of the Israelites under the Old Covenant, they are not binding upon us, nor are they given especially with nutrition in mind. We're always trying to figure out what must be the nutritional value of this. It may have nothing to do with that. God was making a very distinct people. But what I want to look at is God. What has God said? What has God done? And how has it anything to do with bread? Here we go. Adam and Eve apparently lived as vegetarians. Best we understand from what we read in the scriptures, that's what it presents. Vegetables are plants, grains, fruits, and herbs. God had intended for us, apparently, to eat those vegetables. When Noah survived the flood, God specifically told him to eat animals in Genesis 9. It was not against God or corrupt to eat animals because God specifically told mankind to do that. When the Israelites left from Egypt, God commanded their observance of Passover, saying, quote, "Eat unleavened bread," which is a quick bread of sorts, as it was a bread of haste. They didn't have any yeast in it. It said, "Eat unleavened bread and kill a Passover lamb and eat it with bitter herbs." Those all fit into the Passover service of Exodus 12. Of course, we get our communion service from that. And Jesus also ate the Passover, Luke 22. Now, God promised the Israelites that he was leading them to the land of what? Milk and honey. We've talked about that on Wednesday night. Chapter 13 of Exodus says that. And why is he telling them that? Is it a beneficial thing to have milk and honey? Apparently it is. Jesus said that the greatest prophet ever was John the Baptist in Matthew 11. But all we know of John's diet was that he ate honey and locusts in Matthew 3. Jesus called mostly fishermen to be his apostles, and even helped them catch fish and eat them, John 21 shows us. Jesus also ate grain in Matthew 12, and he and the disciples went into the farm fields on the Sabbath, which caused a bit of a stir, but he was eating grains. John 6, we read of the time that Jesus fed the 5,000, and he did it by multiplying 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. Jesus referenced bread many times in the Bible, often taking bread and saying grace for it after he'd risen from the dead. And also, as we repeat month after month before his crucifixion, he gave us our communion service based on the Passover service. And in his Lord, in what we call the Lord's Supper, he takes the bread. He commands us to eat the bread in remembrance of him. Now, when he did that in front of the apostles, he was giving them substantial amount of bread. It was part of the meal. With us, it's a little wafer. It's a symbol, a memorial of that. How sad it is for someone to reject the consumption of bread at communion just because it's bread and evil as propounded by the carnivorists. And what of fruit? Jesus tried to eat a fig, but the tree wasn't producing, and Jesus used it as an object lesson for the state of Israel. In Mark 11, it says, quote, "He was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves." So what is the takeaway? God created plants and animals and made them both food for man. Of the plants, we see the consumption of grains directly and in the form of bread. We see herbs eaten. We see honey and fruit being consumed. We have a God who made all this, then came to us physically in the person of Jesus Christ, who not only distributed food, but ate it himself. This doesn't always jive with modern nutritional advice. The question we ask ourselves is this: does the diet fad or the Bible know what is good for us? Would God knowingly poison us, make rituals to kill us, command us to eat trash? I think not. So what am I left with when considering a diet for myself? I would say that we be wise about what we consume as food and make sure it's really food and not food bathed in chemicals or food that is not real food but is just presented as such. Stick to as close to what God has made that you can. He made corn and said it was good, but he didn't make corn with added high fructose corn syrup and half a dozen additives that will keep the corn from going bad for 40 years. If it pickles the corn, what's it doing to your innards? He makes the grains from which we bake bread, but they're whole, they have fiber, they digest at a slower pace, they have nutrients. Choose foods that are closest to the hand of God and furthest from the adulteration of modification. And have faith more in God than in the directions of fallen man. As I was going through some of this material, I realized how many diets since I was a kid have come up as fads and gone away because somebody will convince everybody that this is the right way. Here's how your body works. Here's the nutrition you get. So you need to do this, and everybody jumps on the bandwagon. And after a while, they realize, it's not really panning out. Jack LaLanne, the famous fitness man from a few decades back, once said, "Exercise is king and diet is queen. Together, they are a kingdom." People often switch them or ignore one or the other. Don't do that. There is a true king who made us, gave us all the foods of earth, and that is King Jesus, who is also called our great physician, our provider, our savior, the Lord of the kingdom. Follow him, and you'll be in the best place possible in every area of your life. I'll leave you with this little Thanksgiving poem I found online. It's called No Thanksgiving Dinner. It says, "'Tis the night before Thanksgiving, and all through our house, no turkey is baking. I feel like a louse. For I am all nestled so snug in my bed, I'm not getting up, and I'm not baking bread. No pies in my oven, no cranberry sauce, 'cause I give the orders and I am the boss. When out of the kitchen there arose such a clatter, I almost got up to see what was the matter. As I drew in my head and was tossing around, to the bed came my husband. He grimaced, he frowned, and laying his finger aside of his nose, he scared me to death, and I thought, here he goes. He spoke not a word as he threw back my quilt, and the look that he gave was intended to wilt. So up to the ceiling my pillows he threw. I knew I had it. His face had turned blue. 'You prancer, you dodger, you're lazy, you vixen. Out yonder in kitchen, Thanksgiving you're fixin'.' But he heard me explain with my face in a pout, 'I'm just plain too tired, and we're eating out.'" It's not Thanksgiving yet, and it's not too late to have some chili with some nice whole grain bread. Maybe Gary will give you some tonight, right? Okay, Jeff.